General Hospital will reveal that Josslyn has never felt such a rage in her life. The news about Cyrus spread quickly, and every detail felt like a knife carving deep into her heart. He was not only the one who caused unimaginable suffering, but he also existed shamelessly, as if nothing could touch him. From Sam, Dex, to Michael, her closest loved ones were all victims in his twisted game. And now, Michael was fighting between life and death in the hospital. Josslyn knew that ordinary justice would not be enough to stop this monster. In recent days, everything seemed to spiral out of control. The pieces of truth were being pieced together by Felicia, the evidence provided by Jack Brennan, and the bitter feeling that the law still could do nothing about Cyrus. He had a talent for concealing his crimes behind layers of piety, and no one could touch him. For Josslyn, this was unacceptable. She could no longer stand idly by. In her heart, a thought began to form: if no one could stop him, she would do it herself. One stormy evening, Josslyn entered the room where Dex had once stayed before leaving her life. The dim light from a desk lamp made everything in the room appear cold. She searched for something, not sure what she was looking for, only knowing that the answer must be somewhere in there. Her hand accidentally brushed against something hard and cold. When she pulled it out, she saw it was a gun. The cold sensation of the metal spread from her palm to her entire body. Josslyn stood frozen, staring at the gun as if it were speaking to her. She knew it belonged to Dex, and now it was the only thing that could help her carry out her plan. The internal conflict within Josslyn lasted for hours. She thought about Michael, about Sam, about Dex, and the broken dreams they all shared. Those images made it impossible for her to give up on her intention for revenge. Her responsibility was not only to herself but to the people she loved, those whose lives had been ruthlessly taken away. The decision was made. She would not let Cyrus live another day. Josslyn spent the night preparing. She learned about Cyrus's schedule, knowing that he often prayed at the small chapel near the hospital after each of his crimes, a hypocritical act he used to conceal his cruelty. She followed him silently, memorizing every step he took. Her mind never stopped calculating the approach, the way to complete her plan without leaving any trace. But above all, she had to make sure he would never harm anyone again. On that fateful night, Josslyn left the house in dark clothing, the gun hidden in her coat. Light rain fell, blending with the sound of wind howling through the empty streets. She walked with purpose towards the chapel where Cyrus usually went. As she neared, she stopped in the shadows, watching. Just as she had predicted, he was standing there, hands clasped, his face a mask of false piety. It seemed like he was praying, but to Josslyn, it was just a sick charade. She stepped forward, each footstep steady. The sound of her shoes echoed softly on the tile floor, enough for Cyrus to hear. He turned, his eyes full of surprise as he saw Josslyn. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone a mix of caution and curiosity. But Josslyn didn't answer. Instead, she drew the gun, pointing it at him. The feeling of power from the cold weapon made her feel more confident, but at the same time, her heart raced in her chest. "What do you think you're doing?" Cyrus sneered, taking a step forward. But Josslyn wouldn't let him get closer. "Don't take another step," she said, her voice cold and determined. Cyrus stopped, realizing she wasn't joking. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Josslyn looked into his eyes, seeing the cruelty, the falsehood, and the growing fear filling his gaze. She thought of Michael, Sam, Dex, and the suffering they had endured. Without a second of hesitation, she pulled the trigger. The dry, sharp sound of the gunshot reverberated through the small space of the chapel. Cyrus collapsed to the floor, blood spreading from his body into a dark puddle. His eyes widened, full of shock and panic, before the final light in them went out. Josslyn stood there, breathing heavily, her body trembling from the adrenaline. She looked down at Cyrus, feeling no remorse, only an indescribable sense of relief. She had done what needed to be done. But when the sound of police sirens filled the air outside, she realized that her life would never be the same again. She knew she had stepped onto a path with no turning back. But deep inside, she understood that if she had to choose again, she would do the same thing. That night, Josslyn was taken to the police station. Jack Brennan appeared, his eyes filled with concern but also decisiveness. He knew Josslyn wasn't a bad person, but her actions would make her pay the price. Still, Jack couldn't let her face it alone. He decided to cover up the truth, creating a different story to protect her. In the weeks that followed, Josslyn's life became chaotic. She could not return to the normal life she once had. The stares of those around her, the questions from the police, and the haunting dreams of that fateful night constantly weighed on her. But above all, she knew she had done the right thing. Cyrus was gone, and no one would have to endure the suffering he caused anymore. As time passed, Josslyn began to find new meaning in her life. She decided to cooperate with Jack, joining WSB's activities to use her abilities for a greater purpose. Though the road ahead would be difficult, she had no regrets about what she had done. Because she knew that sometimes, in order to protect the people you love, you have to stand up and fight, no matter the consequences. Cyrus's death brought a temporary peace to Port Charles. His presence had once been a nightmare for the residents, and now, they could breathe a sigh of relief, feeling as though the heavy burden had been lifted. The families that had once been threatened by him found some peace in their daily lives. The streets that had been cloaked in Cyrus's darkness now shone with hope and new life. Charities, hospitals, and community leaders began working together to rebuild a safer, more united environment, healing the wounds he had left behind. However, behind the quiet facade, true enemies still lurked in the shadows, silently waiting for the opportunity to rise again. Cyrus's death was not the end but a turning point in the long battle that Port Charles was facing. The underground forces, once obscured by Cyrus's brutality, now had a chance to emerge with greater ambitions and more dangerous plans. New criminal organizations began infiltrating every corner of the city, seizing the power vacuum left by Cyrus. Moreover, Cyrus's loss left behind loyal followers, those who had not abandoned their blind allegiance to him. These individuals might be planning revenge or chaos in the community. While some residents comforted themselves by thinking they had escaped the fear, others remained uneasy, worried about what might come next. The legal system and local law enforcement were working hard to increase security, but they understood that the real threat could come from anywhere. Port Charles now resembled a calm lake, but beneath the surface, dangerous undercurrents were waiting to erupt. This made the current peace fragile and easily shattered. The people of Port Charles had to learn to live with vigilance, and those responsible for the community, such as the police, lawyers, and leaders, were facing a greater challenge than ever. The darkness may have temporarily receded, but the battle to protect that peace was still long and fraught with unforeseen dangers.